So you want to know, as I talk about these things today, if your marriage is at this point and you're facing these issues, your marriage has failed. Hello, I'm Karen Seitz, and this is the Happy Wife School. This podcast is for married women to realize that we are responsible for our happiness, that no one and no thing can make us happy, and that our husbands are not the source of our unhappiness. In each episode, I red pill married women to know that we are the problem in our marriages to good men. For the good men, this podcast will wake you up to the realities of your wife's woman ways, to take back the power you've unknowingly given away to her emasculation in a constructive, caring way. Before we dive into today's episode, a couple reminders. My message is meant for common and usual marital issues. My podcast is not intended for abusive, violent, or compulsive behaviors in a marriage that are threatening or dangerous. Also, please take a second to visit my website and learn more about my courses, which offer solutions for married women and good men. You can find the link in the description below. With all that being said, let's get started. Today, we are talking about why good men must have strong boundaries in their marriage. And I am specifically talking about in this really inappropriate behaviors on a wife's part when we feel entitled to our sense of happiness and what we feel we deserve to try to make ourselves happy, that are completely inappropriate, devious, and immoral behaviors in a relationship. So the reason I want to talk about this today is I have had an influx of applications for my men's course or to meet with me recently of men sharing behaviors from their wives, that their wives have gaslit them and manipulated them into believing that these would be okay in a marriage. And where we're going to head are 5 non-negotiable boundaries that good men must have with their wives to highlight some of these behaviors that men have shared with me, or actions or requests from their wife that are huge, huge red flags in the marriage. So this video today in this episode is meant for information for good men so that you can break through the confusion and the gaslighting and regain your logic and common sense. Because what I'm going to share of totally inappropriate behaviors from a wife and boundaries a good man must have on the outside, when you're not in it and experiencing it, these are going to seem pretty like, duh, it's not okay for a woman to do that in her marriage. But the problem and challenge for a good man is when he's in that and he's been so coerced into believing his wife's side and what she thinks is okay in a marriage or relationship, a good man loses his logic and reasoning and common sense, because that is the impact and effect that the manipulation, the emasculation, and the gaslighting from his wife causes. So you want to know, as I talk about these things today, if your marriage is at this point and you're facing these issues, your marriage has failed. And that is a very difficult truth, a very heartbreaking and crushing truth to come to. But it is imperative and vital for a good man to come to these truths so he can evaluate his values, his priorities, and make choices for himself, his marriage, his family moving forward, and no longer be duped and not be naive and a fool to what is going on in the marriage. So this isn't necessarily giving a solution, and that these are things that some good men aren't going to be able to stand up to. I'm going to go a little bit more into that in a moment. So usually I give a solution at the end of my videos, but the truth is, if a woman is at this point and demonstrating these behaviors in the marriage, and a good man is married and facing these in his marriage with his wife, there's really no solution to these issues and no solution to enforce these boundaries, but to see the reality and again break out of any misled thinking that these are okay. So it's important to know as I get into this to remind you that when I speak of good men and the nature of the good men that I work with and who my message is for, good men are not alpha men who have a no BS attitude. And if any of these things were going on in their marriage would say, pack it up and leave. It's done. Good men who take my advice and resonate with my perspective and realize their marriage is not as simple and cut and dry as pack up and leave, that it's complex and there's complicated dynamics and things to consider. Men who take my advice are managing the relationship and seeing a constructive way to move forward so they're no longer gaslit, manipulated, or emasculated by their wives if they choose to stay, are not simps. They're not betas. They are strong men who are grounded in their values and priorities and making an informed choice based on the reality of their marriage that aligns with their values and their priorities. So we're looking at today, how do you navigate these as a good man who is choosing to stay based on his kids, his family, his values? How do you navigate these complex, difficult issues? The goal, when you have a wife who is devious, immoral, and behaving inappropriately in the marriage and gaslighting, the goal is to not stop the behaviors. While some good men might be strong enough and willing to take the risk to face their wife's wrath and potential retaliation and lay down the law of the land, most good men who are looking at their level of risk they're willing to take and looking at their values, and most often the value is keeping their family together. The goal is to manage the relationship, but from a place of seeing and knowing the reality and picking and choosing where he's going to stand up and confront some of these issues. So these good men are managing the relationship, which means they're navigating the emasculation, the manipulation, the gaslighting, knowing the reality and no longer being duped by it. And if you're a good man listening and you're experiencing some of these behaviors from your wife, and since we're not at the 5 yet, to give an example of her being very secretive with her phone and hiding who she's talking to or messaging with on her phone is one example. You want to weigh the risk of the confrontation, knowing the wrath and retaliation your wife may be capable of. Some men will tell you, you just stand up to her and you lay down the law of the land. But that's not realistic because the dynamics are much more complex and sensitive than here's your bag, see you later. There's finances involved, assets involved, there's children involved. Some good men have public-facing careers and jobs and are a known member of the community. So it's very, very rarely that it's as simple as we're done. A good man who has decided to stay knows he's not leaving, that his values, whether that be his faith, whether that be his kids, is to stay. And in that, you want to keep things as stable as possible and mitigate and manage the volatility of your wife. So you're picking and choosing the battles of what you're going to stand up about and confront your wife about based on your values of what's most important. And this is not weak. It is incredibly empowering and requires a tremendous amount of strength, integrity. It requires a strategy and being smart. And again, based on his values and goals of the marriage. Because in managing, when these types of issues are happening in the relationship, you're having to manage it and do this in a very conscious place, not from a place of being a victim. A place of saying, okay, this is the reality. I'm trying to do everything I can to keep my family together and have there be as much peace and calm as possible, knowing this is the reality of my wife. And that can't be done from a weak place of being a victim. It has to be done from a place of being incredibly strong. So what I'll be sharing are all red flags for a good man to know that if these are the actions and behaviors your wife has in the marriage, she is telling you in her woman speak through her actions and behaviors that she is unhappy and planning to leave you and divorce you. And a good man who's doing everything he can to keep his wife happy or solve some problem that their wife has gaslit them to believe that it's his fault, have lost clarity and logic of what his wife's behavior is telling him, because clearly none of these behaviors are reasonable and no logical man would ever agree to these things with his wife. But the spell and the trap of how he's been manipulated to believe that they are okay, he can't see through when he's in it, because all of these are obvious when you are not in it. But a good man loses that perspective and, again, that reason and logic. If you decide to confront your wife on any of these behaviors, the degree to which she has a temper tantrum and makes you bad and wrong and gets upset that you try to confront her and set constructive boundaries, the degree to which she has a temper tantrum and meltdown and belittles you and makes you wrong in that is the degree to which you can know you are right. And that level of reaction from her is confirmation that she is devious and has immoral intentions. And there's a selfishness and self-centeredness of what she feels is lacking in the marriage caused by you. And she's making you believe you are the problem in her having to go do these things. So again, I'm about to get into what are these 5 non-negotiable boundaries good men must have with their wives. I'm not telling you to set the boundaries, but trying to teach you these boundaries so that you are not confused. You know the reality, and that if your wife is engaged in these behaviors, she's basically telling you that I'm thinking and planning to get a divorce. And the reason that I'm not telling you to stand up to these or that you have to do something about them is many good men don't have that strength or are not willing to take the risk of how his wife might retaliate in her wrath of him standing up to these things. And he has to be strategic in navigating if it is his goal to keep his family together and to stay. So getting into 5 non-negotiable boundaries good men must have with their wives. Number 1, it is never okay that your wife comes to you and says she is bored and unstimulated sexually and wants to open the marriage or any version of that, which allows her to have sex with another man. Again, I know that seems like duh, but the amount of men who have reached out to me or that I have talked to that this has happened is kind of astounding to know that this is not an uncommon issue in our modern day marriages. And when they're in it and confused and their wife has made them the problem, they might agree to this, trying to make their wife happy or, again, solve some problem that she has gaslit him into believing he is the problem. Also under this is anything she brings up of wanting to experiment or try things with other people because she never got the opportunity. Do not fall for that. This is her clearly being devious and immoral in her behavior. Number 2, it is never okay for your wife to say that she wants to have a friendship or some sort of platonic relationship with another man under any circumstances. This includes if she wants to reconnect with an old male friend from college or high school, or she wants a friendship with her high school boyfriend that she reconnected with on Facebook, or a coworker or someone on the internet, and she says they are just friends. You want to know, no, they are not just friends. This is the start of an emotional affair and very likely a physical affair. And if this is happening, she is showing you her intentions of going outside the marriage. Under this, it's never okay for her to go visit an old male friend or boyfriend. Do not let her gaslight you into thinking that that is okay. Also, under this, it's not okay for her to try to get male attention by posting inappropriate pictures on Instagram or anywhere else for that matter. I know this seems like all of this should be very clear and of course, but this is where men get duped and fooled and think it's something they did or their fault or they are to blame because of what their wives have made them believe that this is okay. Number 3, it is never okay for your wife to not be freely open to what is on her phone and share her password. If she is withholding that from you or saying it's her property and her privacy, or she is secretly texting and messaging or going into another room to have a conversation she doesn't want you to hear, if she's on WhatsApp and has a passcode on it that you can't get into, you can know she's hiding something and has devious and immoral intentions. That is not okay, and don't be fooled or duped that anything other than where your imagination is going is absolutely happening. And do not let her tell you otherwise or why she's doing that or why it's innocent. It is not. Number 4, it is never okay for your wife to go on a vacation on her own. If she comes to you and says, we should go on separate vacations, I just need to get away on my own and be alone and have some space to myself. Again, she has devious and immoral intentions. This is code for I am looking to hook up with someone and you will never know. This also includes any version of I need to go find myself. So number 5 of non-negotiable boundaries good men must have with their wives. It's a little different than the last 4 that I talked about, but I included this one for any dad who is watching that's trying to educate his son who is considering marriage, or any young man watching, or any man of any age who is considering marriage. Number 5, you want to know it's never okay that your fiance not agree to sign a prenup. If done well with a really good lawyer, they are very effective. And you do not want to marry a woman who is not willing to sign a prenup. The purpose is you are telling a woman, this is a serious commitment that I am making, and I am taking it very seriously. He's saying, I want to know that you're just as serious about this commitment in the marriage as I am to you. And you are finding out in this the character and caliber of woman that you are marrying. There are only 3 reasons that a woman would not agree to a prenup. Number 1, because she is solely interested in being taken care of and having financial security. Number 2, she's emotionally unstable and immature. And number 3, it's showing the degree of her selfishness and self-centeredness. And if she's any of these 3 and not willing to sign a prenup, there is a high risk of divorce, and she is going to be on the high end of the spectrum of woman ways that I talk about. So men want to be looking for, how is she going to gaslight you that this isn't a good thing and that you are somehow wrong and bad for suggesting it or insensitive. So those are the 5 non-negotiable boundaries good men need to have with their wives, and knowing what is never okay or acceptable. That especially with the first 4, if those things are happening already in a marriage, the marriage has failed and your wife has no intentions of re-engaging and making the marriage work and solving the issues. So remember, the purpose of this is for good men to know these are unreasonable. And of course, any man listening who's on the outside of this is saying, this is dumb. Of course, they're unreasonable. But this is what a good man gets trapped in, of believing it's somehow okay. And you don't want to be a fool to what's going on, or thinking that if your wife wants to do any of these things, that it's somehow going to solve some sort of problem in the relationship or solve her unhappiness and things are going to be okay. It is only going to get worse from here. The marriage is already over. But if a good man is choosing to stay, to make it work, to make it the best it can be, typically for his kids, then you have to know these are the behaviors happening, what your wife is telling you in them, so you can be in the reality and not be a fool to what is going on. Some men can put their foot down and stand up to their wives in these and rock the boat. Some men will not, because they're weighing the risk and being smart and strategic of what do I need to manage and embrace the suck to keep this together and make it be as stable as it can be. Because many men will choose to go along, to get along, to keep the family together for their kids. But again, you want to be grounded in the reality of it and know that that actually takes a lot of strength. And to preserve your own mental health, your own sanity, you have to do it from a conscious place of knowing why you are doing it and navigate it from that place of taking responsibility for your choice and knowing why you are doing it. Again, it seems like, why would I have to do this video or share these things? But given the conversations I've had with men over the last few weeks, the things men are writing into me and their confusion of being in some of these situations and not being able to see clearly what's going on, let me know that this was really important to talk about and give this information so that you are not fooled or disillusioned in any way of what your wife is up to and what's really happening. To wrap this up, because this is kind of heavier and difficult issues to talk about of what happens in a marriage, of having a little humor. I mean, I was not laughing about this happening, but how preposterous it would be if you turned the tables and a good man went to his wife and said he wanted to open the marriage, and how his wife would respond. Or a man wrote in saying he's recently divorced, but in the marriage, and he says, I look back now and realize how dumb it was, but I clearly had no boundaries and I just wanted things to be okay. His wife actually came to him and asked him, would you be okay with me talking provocatively and sexually with men online? And wove this whole story around it of why it was innocent. And he fell for it and agreed to it. And he can look back now and go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? But he was so lost in what she had done to him and the emasculation and the gaslighting in the relationship. He had no boundaries and said, okay. But can you think of, I was talking with David, my mentor, as we were going over this before I went live. I was like, oh my gosh, if Adam came to me and said, hey, Karen, would it be okay if I talked provocatively and sexually with women online? Oh my gosh. As women, we know that's not appropriate. Heads would roll. But it somehow, as women, we expect and think and have duped our husbands and see how much we've duped them, that we feel entitled to these behaviors and then coerce a man into thinking that that's okay and feeling that we're entitled and justified in our decision to do these things is really, I've been using the word preposterous. It's really preposterous. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. If you haven't, go check me out on YouTube, Rumble, and X. You can find the links in the description below to connect with me there. For those women listening who know you are the problem and want a path forward to take responsibility and change your own inner turmoil and unhappiness, I have a course for women called the Happiness Program, which is the solution to the unhealthy relationship you have with yourself and the issues and challenges you have in your life and your marriage. You can find the link in the description below to apply for a free consultation with me. And for the good men listening who want a solution to take back the power you've unknowingly given away to your wife, I have a course for you too called the Marriage Rescue Course for Good Men Only that teaches you how to rebuild your strength and confidence as a good man so that you can navigate the relationship with your wife in a healthy, constructive way. Again, you can find the link in the description below to apply for a free consultation with me. Thank you again so much for listening, and I look forward to talking with you soon.